Millionaire CEO falls hopelessly in love with a single mother on a cruise and begins a story that goes beyond material wealth. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Alexander Sterling stepped onto the gleaming marble floor of the cruise ship's lobby with his phone still pressed tightly to his ear. His jaw was clenched, voice low as he tried to manage the latest twist in a high-stakes corporate negotiation. The noise of chattering passengers and upbeat lounge music swirled around him, but he barely noticed. All that mattered was the deal he was about to lose, and the fact he couldn't do a thing about it from the middle of the ocean. He ended the call with a curt goodbye and sighed. Already, a sense of restlessness crept in. His doctor had insisted he disconnect for the sake of his health, but stepping away from his empire felt like handing a loaded weapon to his business rivals. He glanced around at the vaulted ceilings and glittering chandeliers of the ship's lobby. This was supposed to be a chance to relax, but every fiber of his being wanted to race back to his office. A photo in his wallet drew his attention. He'd caught a glimpse while taking out his keycard. He shut it quickly, heart twinging at the memory. It was from a different time, a past relationship that had collapsed under the strain of his secrets. Infertility was not the kind of confession that wealthy CEOs were expected to make. It still weighed heavily on him, even here, where ocean breezes should have carried such burdens away. Needing fresh air, Alexander stepped onto the deck. Palm trees in oversized planters dotted the open space, and pastel umbrellas lined rows of sun loungers. Laughter from families floated in the salty wind. Already he sensed watchful gazes, people who had recognized him from business magazines or television appearances. Keeping a low profile was going to be harder than he thought. He craved quiet, but that hope vanished almost immediately when his phone buzzed again. His friend and assistant Greg was on the other end. "Alex, the negotiations aren't going well," Greg said. "They're pushing for a bigger percentage and we can't stall forever." "I'm doing what I can," Alexander replied, trying to suppress an edge of frustration. "Just keep them at bay until I'm off this ship." Greg promised to do his best, then ended with a gentle reminder. "Try to rest. The doctor was clear about your stress levels." Alexander exhaled sharply and slipped his phone into his pocket. Rest. Right. As he passed an area near the pool, the echo of lively music made him pause. Children splashed in shallow water, parents lounged in the sun, and a slight pang of longing cut through him. He forced the feeling aside. If he was here, he might as well look around. A woman's startled cry broke through the music. Alexander's gaze snapped to the edge of the pool where a small boy had climbed onto the narrow ledge and was teetering dangerously over the water. In a flash, a young woman, elegant yet visibly panicked, rushed forward. Her dark hair swept around her shoulders as she lunged, grabbing the boy just before he lost his footing. The child let out a yelp, more frightened than hurt. Alexander was moving without thinking, darting around sunbathers to offer help. He reached them in time to steady the boy's arms, preventing a worse tumble. The woman was breathing hard, clutching the child against her chest. "Are you two okay?" Alexander asked, concern softening his usually clipped tone. She looked up, relief and alarm wrestling in her eyes. "Yes, I think so. Thank you," she managed, pressing a hand to the boy's forehead to check if he was all right. He clung to her shirt, sniffling. Alexander knelt briefly, making sure the boy was unhurt. There was a vulnerability in the pair, mother and child, hearts still pounding. The woman's determination shone through her panic, and something about it pierced straight through Alexander's usual reserve. "It's all right, Oliver," she whispered to the boy. "We just got a little scare." Oliver gave a tentative nod, eyes wide. Alexander stood, offering the woman a gentle smile. "I'm glad you saw him in time." She returned a grateful, slightly shaky smile. "Thank you for helping." Her gaze flicked around, as though suddenly aware of people watching. Alexander could already feel curious eyes on them. A moment later, he spotted someone in the distance, a man wearing sunglasses, phone angled in their direction, surely snapping a photo. He turned away quickly, hoping to keep the flash of recognition from his own expression. The woman's voice, calmer now, floated to him. "I'm Valerie, by the way, Valerie Monroe." "I'm Alexander," he answered. He considered whether to add his last name, but something told him to hold back. "If you need anything—" She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm fine, just a bit rattled. I was sure he was safe by the pool's edge. I looked away for a second." She gave a nervous laugh, hugging the boy to her side. Alexander nodded, well aware how quickly accidents could happen. He noticed a faint bruise forming on Valerie's arm from her frantic grab. "You might want to get some ice for that," he suggested gently. "Oh, it's nothing," she murmured, though she did glance at the mark in surprise, as if noticing it for the first time. Then, catching the hush that had fallen over the crowd, she urged Oliver to say goodbye. "Let's not cause a scene," she said softly. Alexander watched them walk off, something stirring in him he couldn't name. Her protective instinct for her child highlighted a hollow place in his own life. The memory of heartbreaks and half-spoken truths churned in him, but he forced it back. With a quiet nod to a curious bystander, he made his way to a more secluded corner of the deck. He leaned against the railing, letting the breeze hit his face. The phone burned in his pocket, but he ignored its vibration for a moment, gazing at the endless stretch of ocean. He'd come on this cruise because he had no choice, doctor's orders, but also because some social event organizers claimed his presence would boost his public image. He hated the idea of being watched, labeled, and judged. Yet he couldn't escape the cameras, no matter how hard he tried. A short while later, he stepped inside again, crossing the spacious corridors. His suite was on one of the upper decks, a luxurious space with panoramic windows. Once there, he found 2 missed calls and a string of messages from Greg. His eyes flicked over them, each message urging him to not let any scandalous photos surface. The paparazzi thrived on sensational headlines, and anything that implied Alexander was losing control could cost him fortunes in the boardroom. He scrolled through, tension mounting with every word. Another message warned that a rival investor might be fueling these rumors, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Alexander pushed a hand through his hair and dialed Greg back, voice tight as he demanded updates. Greg offered little reassurance but tried to calm him. "If you let yourself get rattled, they win," Greg insisted. "Stay composed, get some rest, and be mindful of cameras." Alexander ended the call abruptly, tossing his phone onto the plush couch. Exhaustion tugged at him, yet his mind refused to settle. Every time he closed his eyes, he pictured Valerie bracing her child against the pool deck. The quiet strength in her eyes reminded him of everything he'd been missing. No matter how skilled he was in the corporate world, nothing compared to the intensity of real human connections, especially between a parent and a child. A pang of envy cut through him, but it was laced with admiration. There was a time he'd imagined having children of his own. That dream had slipped away when doctors confirmed what he already suspected. He wandered over to the floor-to-ceiling window. The view was stunning. The sun had drifted lower, painting the horizon with gentle pinks and oranges. But he felt none of the peace the scene was supposed to inspire. He thought again of the cameras lurking around every corner, of the deal hanging in the balance, of the personal emptiness he'd tried to bury. Still, he couldn't get Valerie Monroe out of his head. Why had she left such a strong impression on him? Was it her resolve to protect her child at any cost, or the quiet grace in the way she handled fear? Maybe it was the reminder of what he longed for deep down and believed he could never have. His phone buzzed once more. He lifted it, half expecting another series of frantic messages. This time, it was only a note from a friend on board, checking if he was free to grab dinner. No business meltdown? No paparazzi threat? Alexander set the phone back down, letting silence fill the suite. He gazed at the ocean once again, mind drifting to Valerie's determined expression. A strange feeling fluttered in him, an echo of possibility. Something about this forced break from his world, though it felt like torture, might be opening a door he never knew existed. As Alexander set down the phone, he stared out at the open sea, remembering the determination in Valerie's eyes. He couldn't shake the thought that his forced escape might be the start of something he never expected. Alexander woke the following morning to a soft glow slipping between the heavy drapes of his cabin. Despite the gentle light, a familiar tightness clung to his chest, like a stubborn shadow that wouldn't leave. He briefly pressed a hand to his eyes, remembering the turmoil of yesterday, the paparazzi's looming presence, the near accident by the pool, and the look of quiet resolve in Valerie Monroe's eyes. Even in the hush of early day, his mind whirred with unease. He quickly showered and dressed in linen pants and a casual button-down shirt, hoping a more relaxed style might help him blend in among the vacationers. After all, he was supposed to be resting, not nursing the stress that seemed to be following him like a storm cloud. But the mention of dirty secrets in that moment by the pool had shaken him more than he cared to admit. His own truth, his infertility, felt like a constant weight on his chest, and the possibility of it turning into tabloid fodder made him grip the sink with whitened knuckles. The corridor to the main dining area teemed with life. Crew members walked briskly with trays of breakfast pastries, while bleary-eyed tourists ambled toward the buffet lines. Alexander headed for a high-end restaurant on the upper deck, hoping for some calm. As he approached, the crisp scent of fresh coffee and warmed croissants teased his senses, promising at least a brief moment of comfort. Inside, a host guided him to a table near the window. Beyond the glass, the ocean shimmered under the morning sun, and the ship glided across endless blue. He settled into a plush seat and glanced over the menu, when his gaze snagged on a man at the next table. The stranger appeared to be reading a newspaper folded to a business section featuring a large photo of Alexander himself, accompanied by a headline about his corporate negotiations. Alexander felt a prickle of awareness as the man's eyes darted over the paper and occasionally shifted in his direction. He forced himself to remain composed, ignoring the sudden tension in his shoulders, and ordered a simple breakfast. Halfway through his coffee, he caught the man's gaze flicking up again. Alexander responded with a curt, polite nod, only to receive an unsettling smirk. Instantly on guard, he finished his coffee in hurried sips, tossed enough cash on the table to cover the meal, and stood to leave. The last thing he needed was a confrontation before 9 in the morning. Moving into the lively corridor, he nearly collided with a small blur that dashed around a corner. Oliver. The boy was all wide smiles and uncontainable energy, bounding toward a family-friendly cafe where several parents were gathered. Valerie followed close behind, her expression a mix of relief and exasperation. She spotted Alexander and gave a polite, almost apologetic nod. Oliver had already burst into the cafe, pointing excitedly at the display of muffins and fruit cups. "Good morning," Alexander offered, stepping aside to let her pass. The memory of her child's brush with danger the previous day made him more cautious as he watched Oliver dash around the tables. "Morning," she replied, smoothing her wind-blown hair. "He's been talking about the pool all night, which isn't surprising since he nearly dove in head first yesterday." Alexander felt a flicker of warmth at her dry humor. "I'm glad he's not scared off." She glanced at Oliver again. "I think I'm more shaken than he was. Kids bounce back so fast." "It was a scary moment," he said softly, "but he's lucky to have you." Valerie gave him a curious look, as if she was trying to read the man standing in front of her, this quiet, famous CEO who kept drifting into her day. Then Oliver tugged at her hand, urging her inside to grab breakfast. She offered Alexander a quick smile. "Good to see you again." He reciprocated with a nod and watched her go. He would have liked to talk more, but he knew the moment had passed. Besides, an urgent buzzing in his pocket reminded him of reality. He glanced at the screen. Greg's name flashed insistently. With a resigned sigh, Alexander accepted the call and stepped away from the crowd. "Are you okay?" Greg asked, voice laced with tension. "There's a rival investor snapping at our heels. He's hinting to the press that you're hiding out at sea because the deal's falling apart." Alexander fought to keep his voice steady. "I'm doing what I can here. Tell him to shove his assumptions back where they came from." Greg sighed. "Just keep a low profile, boss. If that investor found a way to feed rumors to the tabloids, you might have a leak on board." Alexander's pulse quickened. "Meaning a paparazzo, right?" "Yes," Greg confirmed. "Someone who wants to catch you off guard." He rubbed his temple. "Great." He said goodbye and continued to the observation deck for some fresh air. The deck was quieter this time of day, with only a few people taking in the panoramic vista. The ocean sparkled vividly under a brilliant sun, an endless expanse that somehow felt both liberating and daunting. Leaning on the railing, Alexander drank in the rolling waves. Then he sensed a soft footstep behind him. He turned to find Valerie, hands in the pockets of a light jacket, hair lifting gently in the breeze. She looked a bit surprised to see him. "Oh, I didn't realize you'd be here too," she said, a hint of shyness in her tone. "I needed some air," he replied. A comfortable silence settled, both gazing out at the sweeping horizon. The near-constant hum of the ship's engines and the distant calls of seagulls provided a gentle soundtrack. Valerie glanced at him. "Thank you, by the way, for helping with Oliver. You came out of nowhere. I'm just glad he wasn't hurt." He hesitated, then added, "I apologize if my presence draws attention. I realize you came here to relax." She let out a small, resigned laugh. "I'm trying to give Oliver a good time, but I keep worrying about public attention. You know, cameras, tabloids, single mom stuff." A flicker of understanding passed between them. "I get it. Sometimes public eyes look for any excuse to turn your life into a headline." Valerie studied him quietly. "Are you used to it?" He nodded, mouth tightening slightly. "Too used to it." The deck fell silent as a small group walked by, cameras slung around their necks. Valerie tensed, half turning away. The group passed without incident, but Alexander's gaze lingered on a figure in the back, a guy with the same disconcerting smirk he'd seen earlier at breakfast. The man had his phone angled in their direction as though capturing something. Alexander's stomach churned with unease. Valerie followed his line of sight, but saw only the retreating group. "Someone you know?" He forced a half smile. "Just a suspicion." She didn't press, sensing he was protecting her from something. Instead, she shrugged off the tension. "Well, I should get back to Oliver. He's always up to something when he's this excited." They exchanged a warm nod, and she turned to go. Alexander watched her leave, a swirl of strange emotions twisting inside him. Admiration, empathy, and a craving for something unnameable. Just as her figure slipped out of sight, he caught a glimpse of the man again, phone lifted as though snapping a stealthy photo. A wave of frustration threatened to boil over. He inhaled, willing himself to stay calm. Ducking back into the corridor, he headed for his suite. Once inside, he flicked on his laptop, hoping to join a video call or at least check urgent emails, but the ship's spotty internet refused to cooperate. Each failed connection only amplified his frustration. Finally, he gave up with a sharp exhale, tossing his phone onto the bed. Somewhere on the ship, Valerie sat in her own cabin with Oliver perched beside her, sifting through a new puzzle book they'd picked up. She tried to keep her tone cheerful for his sake, praising his little accomplishments. Yet her thoughts drifted to the look on Alexander's face. Something about him, the polite reserve that hinted at deeper loneliness, stirred her heart. She'd recognized traces of heartbreak in his eyes, and it unnerved her. The last thing she needed was more complication in her life, especially if a camera's flash might turn them into headlines. That afternoon, Alexander lost himself in a fruitless attempt to call his lawyers and quell the rumors flying around the business world. Each time, the line crackled, cutting out at the worst moments. He pored over text messages from Greg, references to the rival investor, and half-baked rumors posted on finance blogs. Twice, his phone buzzed with unknown numbers that disconnected as soon as he answered. By late afternoon, the tension was thrumming in his veins. Sunset arrived in a gentle wash of color. The ocean glowed molten gold along the horizon. Valerie stood at the deck railing with Oliver, pointing out how the sun seemed to slip beneath the waves. Farther along the same railing, Alexander was also there, silent and contemplative, though too far away for conversation. Each was lost in private thoughts, yet neither could help glancing in the other's direction. When full darkness set in, the ship's twinkling lights came alive, illuminating corridors, decks, and open-air lounges. Some passengers gathered for evening shows or dinners, buoyed by the promise of carefree entertainment. Alexander, however, retreated to his suite once more, a dull ache forming behind his eyes. In the stillness of the night, he propped himself against the large window overlooking the endless black sea. Tiny flecks of moonlight rippled on the water. His phone vibrated again. He glanced down at the screen and felt a chill run up his spine. The message displayed just a few words, enough to make his heart pound. A spike of dread tightened his chest. He opened the message, a cryptic warning about dirty secrets and how they wouldn't stay hidden forever. Outside, the ocean seemed vast and uncaring, darkness broken only by faint stars. He lifted his gaze to the horizon, anger and worry swirling in his eyes, bracing himself for a storm he felt closing in. For the first time in a long while, he wondered if his personal heartache might spiral into a scandal that pulled someone else down with him. Late at night, Alexander receives a cryptic text threatening exposure of dirty secrets. He looks up from his phone, scanning the dark horizon, wondering how far someone will go to tarnish his reputation and possibly involve Valerie. Morning broke across the horizon in a soft haze, gently illuminating the cruise ship's decks. Alexander felt the warmth of the early sun against his face as he stepped out of his suite, phone already in hand. He hadn't slept well. The cryptic text from the night before still hovered in his mind, an unwelcome reminder that trouble lurked somewhere on board. Trying to distract himself, he scrolled through headlines on a business blog he followed, only to freeze on a bold line. Is Alexander Sterling hiding on a luxury cruise to dodge a colossal meltdown? His chest tightened. Just as he feared, rumors were snowballing. The blog post detailed questionable theories about his absence from corporate negotiations, mocking him for taking an ill-timed vacation. As he read, he could almost feel the comment section swarming with speculation. He shut off his phone, pulse racing. Every time he turned around, another piece of gossip threatened to unravel his reputation. He took the elevator to the ship's mid-level, hoping a brisk walk would clear his head. The corridor was lined with decorative potted plants and tall windows framing endless views of blue sea. Passing near a lounge area, he overheard a cluster of passengers whispering. His name popped up between hushed phrases like "scandalous CEO" and "something to hide." One woman noticed him, eyes widening as if she'd been caught sneaking into a private conversation. They quickly scattered, leaving him alone with his unsteady thoughts. Alexander pushed forward, feeling more determined than ever to stay composed. He found himself outside the entrance to the ship's children's play area, a small but cheery space where bright murals of cartoon dolphins lined the walls. Hearing laughter, he peered through the glass door. Oliver was inside, coloring at a table with a couple of other kids, while a cheerful staff member supervised. Valerie stood a short distance away from the group, arms folded loosely as she kept watch. There was a hint of tension in her posture that softened whenever she glanced Oliver's way. Catching sight of Alexander, she offered a tentative smile and stepped out into the hallway to greet him. "Good morning," she said quietly, not wanting to disturb the children. "Early start again?" He nodded, his expression overshadowed by fatigue. "I needed some air, and some peace, if that's even possible on this ship." Valerie managed a small laugh. Peace? With a bunch of curious passengers and excited kids running around? Good luck. Alexander tried for a smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. How's Oliver doing? Her gaze flicked toward the play area, watching her son show off a colorful drawing to his new friend. He's thrilled there's a kids' lounge, keeps his mind off, well, everything else. He noticed the faint edge in her tone. Has something happened? Valerie hesitated, choosing her words carefully. There's been a lot of chatter. People on the deck, in the hallways, talking about that business scuffle you're in and about me, too. She paused, her gaze dropping. I don't want Oliver to end up as some tabloid footnote. Alexander's jaw tightened. The notion that his troubles might spill over onto an innocent child turned his frustration into protectiveness. I'm sorry, he said, feeling the weight of responsibility. I never meant for this to affect you. Valerie shifted, then gently placed a hand on his arm. I know. I've been through rough moments in my own life. It's just, this is Oliver's big chance to have fun, and I'd hate for it to be overshadowed by gossip. He covered her hand briefly with his own, a silent promise that he understood. Before he could say more, a loud voice interrupted from behind them. Mr. Sterling? A balding man in a polo shirt strode over, eyes gleaming with curiosity. I read an article about your next big deal. Is it true you're selling off some assets? My buddies and I were speculating. Alexander stiffened, stepping partially in front of Valerie. He cleared his throat, voice measured. I don't discuss private business matters. The man persisted, oblivious to the icy edge in Alexander's tone. Come on, it's all over the internet. Are you guys going under, or is this just a ploy to keep shareholders guessing? Valerie took a step forward, polite but firm. Excuse me, we're in the middle of a conversation. If you have questions, maybe another time? The man's gaze flicked between them, clearly enjoying the possibility of prying more gossip out of the situation. Finally, Alexander exhaled. As the lady said, now's not a good time. A moment of awkward silence passed before the man muttered something under his breath and wandered away. Valerie gave Alexander a small smile of sympathy. You handle that better than I would. He shrugged. I've had practice. Still, he couldn't entirely mask the tension in his voice. She nodded and glanced toward Oliver again. They're wrapping up soon. Want to join us for lunch in a bit? There's a cafe near the pool that's usually quieter. Her invitation surprised him. He sensed she wanted to shift the focus away from rumors. Despite the caution in her eyes, her offer felt genuine. Lunch sounds good. I'll meet you by the cafe in half an hour. An hour later, Alexander found Valerie and Oliver seated at a small table under a bright umbrella. The midday sun sparkled off the pool water, sending fractured light dancing across the deck. Valerie had a children's menu on the table, while Oliver excitedly pointed at pictures of hamburgers and fries. There you are, Valerie greeted as Alexander approached. Oliver looked up and smiled shyly, as if recognizing the man who had helped just days earlier. Alexander sat, letting out a breath as he surveyed the families around them, most absorbed in their own happy chatter. It's nice out here, he remarked, trying to sound casual. Oliver wasted no time showing him the kids' menu. There's a captain's burger that comes with curly fries and a shark-shaped cookie. Alexander smiled at the boy's enthusiasm. That sounds like a powerful lunch. Valerie chuckled softly. Powerful is one way to put it. I think I'm going with a simple salad. They ordered, and for a few minutes conversation flowed easily. Oliver shared stories about his favorite comics and how he was going to swim like a dolphin as soon as his mom let him back in the pool. Valerie commented on the little traditions she and Oliver had, like collecting seashells on every beach vacation. Alexander found himself leaning in, interested, asking questions that elicited Oliver's bright laughter. Yet amid the pleasant exchange, Alexander felt an unspoken tension whenever the topic of family was in the air. When Oliver asked if Alexander had kids, the CEO's face flickered with discomfort. He gently deflected, claiming he'd been too busy traveling for work. Valerie noticed the change in his expression, her own smile faltering with concern. "Oliver, sweetie," Valerie said softly, "sometimes grown-ups have different paths." The boy nodded, moving on to another silly story that made them laugh. But Valerie's empathetic glance told Alexander she sensed there was more behind his guarded response. He forced a grin, relieved when Oliver's cookie arrived and the conversation turned to simpler matters. Somewhere across the deck, a camera lens glinted in the sunlight, someone aiming it discreetly in their direction. Alexander's eyes narrowed as he spotted the faint silhouette. He tried to remain calm, focusing on Valerie and Oliver, but a part of him was wound tight, ready to snap if the photographer came any closer. After lunch, Oliver insisted on racing to the dessert stand to see if they had more shark cookies. Valerie excused herself to follow him, giving Alexander a moment to gather the check. Leaning back in his chair, he tried to appreciate the warmth of the sun on his face, the pleasant hum of people enjoying their holiday. Yet he couldn't shake the crawling sensation that he was being watched. By the time they parted ways, the paparazzi was nowhere in sight, but the unease lingered. Alexander returned to his cabin, where his phone flashed with missed calls from an unknown number. He played the voicemails, each one silent except for faint static. Clenching his teeth, he hit delete, knowing full well this was no random accident. Someone was fishing for a reaction. That evening, Valerie sat on the edge of her bed, tucking Oliver in. He was giddy from the day's activities, but finally starting to yawn. She smoothed back his hair, feeling a surge of maternal love mixed with worry. "Get some sleep, kiddo," she whispered. "Tomorrow's a new adventure." He mumbled a sleepy goodnight, and she turned off the lamp, leaving only a soft glow from the cabin's porthole. In the darkness, Valerie's thoughts drifted to Alexander, his guarded smile, the tension in his voice whenever family came up, the swarm of rumors circling like sharks beneath the surface. She didn't know his secret, but she felt his fear was tied to something more than just business. In his own suite, Alexander paced back and forth, phone in hand. Occasional texts from his friend, updates on negotiations, worrying news about how the story might blow up if the paparazzi found a new angle, poured in. He stared out at the inky water, his reflection barely visible in the glass. His mind returned to Valerie and Oliver, the genuine smiles they'd shared over lunch. A longing pulled at him, something he'd tried to bury for years. When at last he felt too restless to remain cooped up, he wandered out for a late stroll on the deck. The lights glimmered across quiet lounge chairs and deserted bars. Somewhere, faint music played from an evening show, but it sounded distant. Leaning over the railing, he watched the ship's wake churn white foam against the dark sea. The hush of night felt both peaceful and heavy, as if the ocean itself carried unspoken secrets. Meanwhile, Valerie slipped out of her cabin for a moment, leaving Oliver asleep. She walked the short distance down the hallway to fetch some bottled water from a vending area. When she returned, something on the floor caught her eye, a slip of paper halfway beneath her door. Her brow furrowed as she bent to pick it up. Her name wasn't on it, but she felt a jolt of anxiety at the scrawled letters. "Watch out who you trust. Some secrets can sink you." Valerie stared at the crumpled slip of paper in her hand. The words, "Watch out who you trust. Some secrets can sink you," burning themselves into her thoughts. A dull throb of fear pulsed beneath her ribs. She glanced at Oliver, snugly asleep in the narrow bed across the small cabin, his cheek pressed against the pillow. The urge to protect him, to shield him from whatever shadows were creeping across this ship, nearly overwhelmed her. If only she could tear that note to pieces and make its warning vanish along with it. She let out a long breath, folding the paper and sliding it into the drawer of the bedside table. Sleep felt impossible after that. Every sound in the hallway set her on edge, so she settled for resting against the headboard, eyes half open, watching Oliver's peaceful rise and fall of breath. Eventually, morning light seeped through the edges of the thick curtains, hinting that a new day had arrived whether she was ready or not. Determined to keep her routine as normal as possible, she coaxed Oliver out of bed with the promise of breakfast pastries and hot chocolate. Though the worry still gnawed at her, she tried to keep her tone cheerful for Oliver's sake. The corridor to the dining area was already busy with families in flip-flops and bright shirts, eager for another day of holiday bliss. Valerie reached the coffee station near the buffet and paused, scanning the crowd for any sign of the figure who'd slipped that note under her door. Valerie. A calm but concerned voice made her turn. Alexander stood a few steps away, a paper cup of black coffee in hand. He looked as though sleep hadn't come easy for him either. Soft lines of exhaustion framed his eyes and his usually immaculate hair was a little disheveled. She gave him a quick nod. "Morning, Alexander." Her tone was polite but carried a faint tremor. He studied her face. "Are you all right? You look unsettled." Valerie considered lying, but she felt too tense to pretend. She quickly glanced at Oliver, who was a few feet away, enthralled by the rows of pastries on display. Lowering her voice, she said, "I got a note last night. It felt like a warning." A light flush of discomfort crossed her cheeks. It mentioned secrets and, well, I'm worried it might have to do with you and this whole tabloid mess. Alexander's features darkened. "I'm sorry you've been dragged into this. I never wanted to pull you or Oliver into something." She placed a hand on his arm, gently stopping him. "I'm not blaming you," she murmured. "But if it endangers my son's peace, I have to be careful." A hush passed between them, broken only by the chatter of nearby passengers. Valerie worried briefly that leaving the cruise midway might be the best solution, but she already suspected it wasn't possible. Confirming her guess, she asked Alexander, "If I wanted to disembark at the next port, do you think that's even allowed?" He shook his head, looking apologetic. "Usually, early disembarkation is complicated. You'd have to handle customs, and with Oliver it might be a hassle." He sipped his coffee, gaze flicking to Oliver. "I don't want you to feel trapped. This is supposed to be a vacation." Valerie managed a tiny, rueful smile. "Not much of a vacation lately." She excused herself to get a croissant and some fruit for Oliver. Alexander lingered, swirling the coffee in his cup, lost in thought. His phone buzzed with a new message from Greg, something about a rival investor spreading rumors that Alexander's company was on the brink. "Watch out for personal drama overshadowing your credibility," the text read. Alexander closed his eyes for a moment. He could almost hear the headlines spinning, "CEO under siege at sea." This was exactly the scenario he'd wanted to avoid. He poured the last of his coffee down the drain and joined Valerie and Oliver at a nearby table. They exchanged tentative pleasantries, Valerie trying to maintain a sense of normalcy while Oliver chatted excitedly about seeing some singing performance in the ship's main ballroom that evening. Overhead announcements mentioned a gala, which made Oliver's eyes widen. "A show, Mom! You promised we could watch," he pleaded, tugging at Valerie's sleeve. She hesitated, recalling the uneasy feeling she'd woken up with. Large crowds meant more chance of running into the paparazzi or whatever threat lurked among the passengers. But Oliver's eagerness sparked a kind of guilt in her. He was just a child craving adventure and fun. "We'll see," she responded softly, brushing her hand over his hair. "Let's just get through breakfast first." Alexander glanced over at Oliver, a subtle fondness flickering in his eyes. Then he turned to Valerie. "Tonight is the mid-cruise gala. They'll have a formal show, dinner, dancing. It's pretty high profile." She gave a small laugh that didn't quite hide her nerves. "High profile sounds like exactly what we don't need." Oliver looked between them, clearly sensing an adult conversation hovering just out of his reach. Wanting to preserve the boy's excitement, Alexander said gently, "Maybe we'll find a quiet corner. The ship's big enough. No reason you and Oliver should miss the fun." Valerie relaxed slightly. "We'll think about it." A short while later, the three parted ways, Oliver determined to return to the kid-friendly lounge for games. Alexander excused himself, needing to handle some urgent work calls. Tucked away in a quiet corner near the ship's small internet cafe, he pressed his phone to his ear, grim-faced as he listened to Greg's updates. "Your rival's claiming you're on the run. He's feeding that line to certain market analysts," Greg reported. "He says your personal life is falling apart and you're trying to dodge your responsibilities." Alexander clutched the edge of a nearby table, frustration and embarrassment burning in his chest. "And the tabloids? Are they running with this?" "Not yet, but they're waiting for any slip-up. Be careful. They want a story that'll shake your company's stock." The call ended on that grim note, leaving Alexander's mind spinning. He saw no easy way to protect his business if the press turned personal matters into a scandal. And every whisper from that paparazzo was a lit match near a powder keg of rumors. Afternoon drifted into evening faster than Alexander expected. Passengers flocked to their cabins to dress for the gala, excitement buzzing through the corridors. Valerie sat on her bed, eyeing a simple but elegant dress she'd brought for dinners on the ship. She felt uncertain, but Oliver had been giddy all day, begging to see the main show in the ballroom. In the end, her love for him won out, and she decided to try, for his sake, to enjoy at least part of the evening. They arrived at the gala to find the ballroom glittering with candlelit tables and crystal chandeliers. A live band played softly on stage, filling the air with a classic tune. Servers bustled about with trays of hors d'oeuvres, while clusters of guests chatted and posed for photos under a cascade of fairy lights. Oliver's eyes sparkled at the sight, enthralled by the grandeur. Valerie straightened her shoulders, hoping she wouldn't see any more suspicious characters hovering in corners. Alexander appeared across the room, dressed in a tailored suit that accentuated his poised, confident bearing. But Valerie caught the flicker of wariness in his gaze as he scanned the crowd. When their eyes met, he offered a small, reassuring nod. She felt a strange sense of solidarity, both of them on guard, yet wanting a moment of peace. Oliver tugged her hand, pointing to the stage. A lively musical performance was beginning, with dancers swirling in bright costumes. He and Valerie edged closer to watch. Just as the music rose, a jarring voice cut through the hum of the crowd. "Sterling, over here!" The paparazzo. He stalked toward Alexander with a determined look, camera dangling at his side. "Any comment on the rumors that your company's teetering on bankruptcy?" The conversation around them died down, heads turning to see the commotion. Valerie felt her stomach clench. She guided Oliver a step behind her, trying to keep him from the spotlight, but it was impossible to miss the rising tension. Alexander's expression hardened. "I'm not discussing business tonight," he said in a level tone. "Please leave us alone." The paparazzo sneered. "You sure about that? Lots of people dying to hear why you're running away on a cruise. And who's this woman you've been seen with? The mother of your next scandal?" A storm of murmurs rippled through the guests. Phones lifted, some capturing the confrontation on video. Valerie's cheeks burned at the implication that she was some scheming accomplice. She held Oliver close, praying he wouldn't get scared. A security officer moved in, sternly ordering the paparazzo to step away, but the man raised his voice louder, determined to get a reaction. "We all want the truth, Sterling, or are you hiding something worse than a failing deal?" Alexander stood taller, jaw tight as steel. He moved to shield Valerie and Oliver, meeting the paparazzo's glare with a quiet but seething anger. "Back off! I'm warning you!" A hush fell as security reached them. One officer placed a hand on the paparazzo's arm, guiding him away from the center of the ballroom. People craned their necks to see. The band had stopped playing, leaving a stark silence. Valerie could hear her heartbeat thudding in her ears. Before the paparazzo could be fully escorted out, he twisted back to point his camera toward Alexander again. "The truth will come out," he hissed, voice echoing through the hushed crowd. "And when it does, trust me, you'll regret not talking now." Security dragged him off, but the damage was done. Onlookers buzzed with speculation, some pitying Alexander, others snickering about potential scandals. Oliver looked up at his mother, eyes uncertain, and she gently turned him away from the stairs. Alexander exhaled slowly, turning to Valerie. "I'm sorry," he said, voice heavy. "I tried to stop it." Valerie placed a calming hand on Oliver's shoulder. "You did what you could. Thank you for keeping us out of it as much as possible." She fought the wave of embarrassment and fear that threatened to swallow her. One look in Alexander's eyes told her he felt that same dread, the sense that their lives were on display for everyone's amusement. In that tense moment, something else flickered between them, an undercurrent of understanding and even longing. Despite the chaos swirling around, Valerie felt an odd sense of safety in Alexander's presence, as though he was the only stable point in a room full of shifting shadows. Still reeling, she managed a soft "thank you" before turning to Oliver, who clung to her side with wide eyes. Alexander stood there, hands curled at his sides, scanning the crowd for any more threats. Their gazes locked, and Valerie felt a surge of empathy. She was certain that behind Alexander's protective stance lay a raw vulnerability, the same fear that if his secrets came pouring out, it might destroy them both. Security escorts the paparazzo away, but not before he gives Alexander a knowing smirk and mutters, "You can't hide the truth forever, especially about not having heirs." The day after the gala confrontation, Alexander stood at his suite's window, watching the sunrise turn the sky from muted gray to a pale gold. The paparazzo's parting words still echoed in his mind, a raw reminder of the pain he'd tried so hard to hide. You can't hide the truth forever, especially about not having heirs. That line cut deeper than any rumor about failing deals. His infertility had always been a silent ache, something he avoided bringing up even to his closest friends. Now, the threat of public exposure felt like a vice around his chest. He stepped away from the window, ran a hand through his hair, and exhaled. He'd hardly slept. Every time he closed his eyes, the paparazzo's voice invaded his dreams, mixing with half-remembered arguments from his past, ex-girlfriends who turned away once they knew he couldn't have children, doctors calmly confirming his suspicions, and the endless stream of articles about the Sterling family line. He'd always felt like a disappointment to his late father, though the man was long gone. Perhaps that was why he fought so fiercely in business, determined to prove himself in any way possible. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, drawing him back to the present. Greg's name lit up the screen. Alexander contemplated ignoring it. He wasn't in the mood for another corporate crisis, but he forced himself to answer. "Morning, Greg," he said, voice rough from lack of sleep. "Morning? Sounds like you haven't slept," Greg teased gently, then sighed. "Listen, things are heating up. That investor who's been needling you is dropping hints that the tabloids might run a piece about your personal life. Something about the Sterling heir who'll never be? It's not confirmed, but they're sniffing around for a major story." Alexander closed his eyes, bitterness churning in his stomach. "Any chance we can get them off my back? We've done the best we can. Without you on land, it's tricky to manage. Just keep your guard up." Alexander ended the call, slipping the phone into his pocket. He glanced again at the brightening sky. After the humiliation of last night, he felt drained. At the same time, a new resolve bubbled inside him. Maybe it was time to consider telling Valerie the truth, before the rumor mill destroyed what little trust existed between them. A knock sounded at his door. He stepped forward, uncertain who would come so early, and opened it to reveal Valerie. Her expression was tentative, but her eyes held warmth. She wore a simple cardigan over her dress, hair pulled back in a loose twist. "Good morning," she offered quietly. "Hope I'm not interrupting. Oliver's at the kids' lounge again, so I have a moment." Alexander nodded, stepping aside so she could enter. The suite's gentle lighting revealed the fatigue etched into her face as well. She hovered near the doorway, fiddling with the strap of her bag. I wanted to see how you're holding up, Valerie said. Last night was intense. He managed a tight smile. I appreciate that. Are you and Oliver all right? She nodded. He was worried, but I told him everything was fine and that security took care of it. He bounces back pretty fast. She paused, a deeper concern shadowing her features. But you, it looked like that paparazzo really shook you. Alexander's jaw tensed. He knows more about me than I'm comfortable with, he said simply. Let's just say, if it goes public, it'll hurt. A lot. Valerie gave him a long, searching look. I don't need details if you're not ready to share. But if you ever need a friend, I'm here. That admission made his heart twist. He was used to people prying for gossip or advantage, not offering genuine support. Quiet gratitude bloomed in him, warring with the instinct to hide. He motioned to a small table by the window. Mind if we sit? I could use the company. She agreed, and they settled across from each other, the sunlight tracing delicate patterns on the carpet. For a minute, neither spoke. It was enough to just breathe in the calm of the morning, the faint hum of the ship's engines in the background. Valerie finally broke the silence, resting her folded hands on her lap. I can't help but notice how tense you get whenever children or family come up. Last night, that paparazzo mentioned heirs. You don't have to say anything, but I'm worried about you. His chest tightened at her gentle tone. The concern in her gaze felt like a soft knocking on the door to his deepest vulnerability. Part of him wanted to throw that door wide open to trust that someone like her might understand. But another part, the one grown hard and cautious, warned him to keep quiet. He faltered, trying to find words that wouldn't sound pitiful. It's complicated. Let's just say there's something about me that the tabloids would love to twist into their next big headline, and it's not about my finances. She leaned in slightly. Sometimes sharing it, even a little, helps carry the burden. He almost spoke then, drawn by the calm sympathy in her eyes, but the words snagged in his throat. Instead, he closed his eyes briefly, inhaling. Thank you, he murmured, for listening. Valerie stood, reading the turmoil in his face, and laid a hand on his shoulder. No pressure. Just know I'm here. And please, watch out for any more stunts from that paparazzo. I'm not sure what he's fishing for, but it feels like it's personal. He nodded, meeting her gaze. I will. They parted soon after, Valerie heading off to collect Oliver, and Alexander left alone with the silent echo of her kindness. He sank into the chair, resting his head in his hands, wrestling with whether to confide in her before the rumors took on a life of their own. Because if she heard about his infertility through twisted headlines, he feared it could hurt her trust and drive her away. Later that afternoon, the ship drifted into warmer waters, the air taking on a balmy, sun-soaked quality. Passengers flocked to the pool decks, wearing bright swimwear and sipping colorful drinks. Valerie found a quiet corner under an umbrella, watching Oliver paddle happily in the shallow end. She glanced around often, wary of cameras, but for the moment, it seemed peaceful. The bright reflection of sunlight on the water made the scene almost idyllic. Her serenity was interrupted when Alexander wandered by, searching for a less crowded spot. He wore a short-sleeved shirt and light trousers, looking slightly out of place among the more casually dressed tourists. She lifted a hand in greeting, and he joined her beneath the umbrella, eyes flicking toward Oliver with a hint of a smile. He's fearless, Alexander remarked, watching Oliver slide under the water and come back up splashing, a grin splitting his face. Valerie laughed lightly. Sometimes too fearless, but he's been having a blast this trip. Alexander offered her a gentle look. Despite everything? She nodded, lips quirking into a wry smile. Kids are great at living in the moment. All he cares about is if the water is warm and the ice cream machine still works. I envy that kind of simplicity, Alexander admitted. He glanced down at his own reflection in the tiles by the pool's edge, expression distant. Things seemed simpler when I was young, too. Valerie studied him, curiosity mixing with compassion. She noticed him clench his fists briefly, as though bracing against an invisible burden. They both fell silent, letting the laughter of other families and the splash of water fill the air. A faint click sounded from behind a sun lounger, a camera lens capturing them. Instantly alert, Alexander tensed. Valerie spotted the movement a second later. The paparazzo was nowhere in sight, but the sense of being watched lurked in every shadow. They decided to move inside, leading Oliver away from the crowded pool area. The boy complained at first, but Valerie promised a midday snack from the ship's cafe, and soon he was contentedly slurping a chilled fruit drink. Alexander trailed behind, scanning the corridors. The entire situation felt like a game of cat and mouse. Later in the evening, Alexander found himself pacing outside the main lounge, phone pressed to his ear in yet another hushed call with Greg. Word from the outside world suggested that competitor rumors were intensifying. If any personal scandal broke, it could crash investor confidence. Alexander rubbed his temple, exhaustion creeping into his voice. Just as he ended the call, Valerie appeared. She was returning from the lounge with Oliver, who was giggling about some balloon trick he'd seen. She caught Alexander's pained look and hesitated. "Bad news?" "Same old," he replied quietly, forcing a half smile for Oliver's sake. "Don't worry." Valerie nodded, then motioned for Oliver to run ahead to their cabin. Once he was out of earshot, she said, "I'm worried you're bearing all this alone. It's not healthy." Alexander glanced at the corridor, ensuring Oliver was gone. "I've always handled things on my own. I'm not used to relying on others." Her tone turned soft. "Sometimes not relying on others can hurt more than it helps." He let her words settle, swirling in his mind like a question that needed answering. With a gentle nod, they decided to walk together toward their cabins, Oliver skipping just a bit ahead. The corridors glowed with low, warm lighting, each step echoing softly against carpeted floors. Outside Valerie's door, they paused to say goodnight. Before he could leave, Oliver gave a sudden grin. "Thanks for being my friend, Alexander." The boy's honesty caught Alexander off guard, a rare smile tugging at his lips. Valerie ushered Oliver inside, then lingered in the doorway. "Get some rest," she said gently. "We'll figure this out, one day at a time." Alexander turned down the corridor, feeling oddly steadier. But as he approached his own suite, something on the floor caught his eye. Another envelope, this one wedged beneath the door. Dread prickled up his spine. He bent down, heart pounding, and tore it open under the low lamplight of the hallway. Inside was a single line scrawled across a small piece of paper. "Want the world to know why you're hiding on this ship?" Alexander paused in the dimly lit corridor, staring at the threatening note in his hand. The stark question, "Want the world to know why you're hiding on this ship?" glared up at him. He glanced warily down the hallway, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. But he was alone. Heart pounding, he slipped the note into his pocket and entered his suite. The tension he felt buzzed beneath his skin like a current. His phone, blinking with unread messages, lay on the small table by the door. He dreaded seeing more cryptic threats or frantic updates from Greg about the business fallout. But he couldn't ignore everything forever, so he scrolled through new notifications. The top text, "More rumors swirling. Keep your guard up." No name, but the unsaved number suggested someone was either looking out for him or watching him far too closely. Morning arrived with a flat, cloudy sky overhead, casting a restless mood over the ship. A warm wind ruffled the flags on the main deck, but the usual sense of carefree vacation felt overshadowed by whispers of drama. Passengers who recognized Alexander gave him curious, sidelong glances as he hurried by, phone clutched in his hand. He spotted Valerie and Oliver having breakfast in a small alcove near the buffet. Oliver was munching happily on cereal, while Valerie hovered protectively, searching the crowd. She looked up at Alexander with relief, but also a flicker of unease. "Any more surprises?" she asked quietly, pushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. Alexander took a seat, lowering his voice so Oliver wouldn't overhear. "Another note under my door," he admitted. "Whoever is doing this is getting bolder." Valerie's eyes darkened with concern. "What did it say?" He hesitated. "Just a threat that they'll expose why I'm really here, why I'm hiding, as they put it." She didn't press further. Instead, she reached across the small table, giving his hand a quick, supportive squeeze. Before either could speak, Oliver interrupted by proudly displaying a second bowl of cereal topped with fruit. The moment shattered, and Valerie smiled wearily, trying to inject normalcy into her voice as she praised her son's creative breakfast. Alexander rose, half apologizing, promising to return after he checked with ship security. Valerie nodded, her gaze drifting to the anxious lines on his forehead, wondering if he'd even find any help, or if the staff could do much beyond an obligatory search for troublemakers. His next stop was the reception area, where a polite but visibly stressed crew member listened to his concerns. They agreed to pass the information on to the security team, advising Alexander to remain vigilant. No immediate leads emerged. Leaving the reception desk, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in a polished brass panel. He hardly recognized himself, shoulders stiff, eyes shadowed from worry. Around midday, news of the previous night's drama had spread across the ship. Whispers about Alexander's confrontation with the paparazzo blended with speculation over whether Valerie was just a fling or an opportunist. The gossip rarely reached them outright, but it vibrated through the corridors like a low buzz impossible to escape. That afternoon, Valerie decided to bring Oliver to a cooking demonstration in the main lounge, hoping the activity would distract everyone from the tension. The demonstration drew a sizable crowd, couples sipping wine, families seated at small round tables, and curious onlookers snapping photos of the chef flambeing dishes on stage. Oliver was delighted, wide-eyed as flames danced in pans. Valerie, however, couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Her eyes darted around, searching for a familiar, unwelcome face. She found him near the back, a man leaning against a column, arms folded. At first, she couldn't tell if it was the same paparazzo or someone else. His gaze locked onto her, though, and an unsettling smirk flickered across his mouth. As if summoned by her unease, Alexander stepped into the lounge soon after, drawn by the promise of a public space with watchful staff. Their eyes met, and Valerie signaled subtly to the man by the column. Alexander spotted him and frowned, pressing through the crowd to reach her side. "Everything okay?" he asked under his breath. She shrugged, tension humming in her voice. "I don't like how he's staring at us. Is he—" Before she could finish, someone to their left cleared her throat pointedly. A tall woman in flashy resort wear looked Valerie up and down with a scornful expression. "Well, if it isn't the gold digger," the woman declared loudly enough for others to hear. "Word is you're aiming to be the CEO's trophy. Lucky you landed on the same cruise, huh?" Valerie froze, her cheeks burning. She glanced at Oliver. Thankfully, he was focused on the cooking show, oblivious to the insult. Anger and embarrassment warred in her chest. "Excuse me?" The woman tossed her hair, crossing her arms. "I'm just calling it like I see it. Don't act offended. A single mom cozying up to a rich man on a cruise? People talk." Alexander's jaw clenched. He stepped forward, voice dangerously calm. "That's enough. You have no idea who you're talking about." The woman's gaze flicked to him, unimpressed. "Oh, I know exactly who you are. Everyone does. The big CEO with all the hush-hush deals. Makes sense you'd pick up a convenient little—" "Stop!" Alexander snapped, stepping protectively in front of Valerie. Heads in the audience began turning. Even the chef on stage paused mid-flambe, sensing the confrontation in the back. "If you have a problem, take it to me. Leave her out of it." Valerie's cheeks burned a deeper red. Part of her wanted to fire back, but Oliver's presence kept her from causing a scene. She grabbed his hand, ready to lead him away, but the woman's mocking tone cut through the air once more. "Oh, I see. Defender of the poor single mom. Perfect headline for the tabloids." A hush spread among the onlookers. Alexander felt a surge of protectiveness flare into anger. "You have no right," he said, steel in his voice. "No right to insult her or to spread gossip like you know anything about our lives." The tension ratcheted higher until a staff member hurried over, apologizing and asking everyone to calm down. Valerie's hands trembled. She glared at the woman, then turned to escort Oliver away, trying to preserve what was left of their dignity. Alexander joined her, ignoring the stares of curious spectators, his jaw set in determination. They wound through the hallway, heading back to safer ground. Oliver tugged at Valerie's hand, confused. "Mom, what's going on? Did we do something bad?" She swallowed hard, kneeling to stroke his hair. "No, sweetie. Some grown-ups are just rude." She forced a smile, though her eyes were wet with frustration. "We'll find something more fun to do, okay?" Oliver nodded, trusting her, and clung closer. Alexander placed a hand on the boy's shoulder in a gesture of support. He then glanced at Valerie, quietly asking, "Are you okay?" She exhaled. "I will be. It's just humiliating." "I'm sorry," he said. "I never wanted you to be a target. This is my fight, not yours." She shook her head, a spark of resolve glinting through her upset. "We're in it now, and I'm not going to let some spiteful rumor ruin my son's trip." They left Oliver at the kids' lounge after ensuring he was comfortable, and then retreated to a more private corner near the ship's art gallery, which was quiet and dimly lit. Valerie leaned against the wall, arms folded, eyes misting as she tried to keep herself composed. Alexander edged closer, voice gentle. "Listen, you're not... anything they say, don't let them define you." She looked up, tears threatening to spill. "I can handle insults about me," she said softly, "but not if they drag Oliver into it. He's just a child." Alexander's hand hovered near hers, a moment of hesitation before lightly curling his fingers around hers. "I promise I'll do whatever I can to keep him out of this." She gave a tiny nod, comforted by his resolve. The warmth of his hand over hers felt like a lifeline, a silent promise. She tried to speak, to voice her gratitude and fear in the same breath, but the words tangled inside her. In the distance, footsteps echoed, and both of them stepped apart, alert to the possibility of more watchers. Late that evening, once Oliver was asleep in her cabin, Valerie sank into the small chair by the porthole, replaying the day's confrontation in her mind. She hated how powerless she felt when faced with vile rumors. Her only comfort was that Alexander had defended her so fiercely. Meanwhile, in his own suite, Alexander stared at the swirl of ocean beyond the window, the moonlight tracing a path across the dark waves. He turned on a small lamp and gazed into the mirror, exhaustion clear in his reflection. Anger simmered in his veins, anger at the paparazzi, the rival investor, the cruel whispers. But most of all, he felt regret for letting Valerie walk into this storm without knowing the truth he carried. She deserved honesty before the press twisted it into something monstrous. He closed his eyes and took a measured breath, phone in hand. There was no turning back if he revealed his deepest secret. Yet hiding it had only made him more vulnerable. Gathering his courage, he steadied his grip on the phone. His reflection stared back at him, tense yet resolute. In a low voice, he finally whispered the words he'd been dancing around for so long. "She deserves to know the truth. Tonight, I'll tell her everything." Alexander spent the rest of the morning wrestling with equal parts dread and determination. He paced his suite, phone clutched in one hand, recalling last night's vow. He would finally tell Valerie the truth about his infertility. The idea made his chest feel tight, but the risk of waiting any longer, letting the tabloids twist his secret into a cruel headline, felt far worse. If anyone deserved honesty, it was Valerie. He dialed room service and arranged something special, a private table set on a secluded section of the upper deck. He requested soft lighting and a modest but elegant dinner, hoping the atmosphere might let them speak freely, away from prying eyes. After everything that had happened, he yearned for a moment of calm where he and Valerie could share more than anxious whispers in passing corridors. Shortly before sunset, he found her standing near the railing of the observation deck, gazing out at the sea. The sky was a palette of oranges and pinks, the water mirroring every color in gentle ripples. Valerie turned at his approach, a hint of worry in her expression, worry that eased a fraction when she saw his tentative smile. "Hi," she greeted softly. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The breeze off the water carried the fresh scent of salt and possibility. "How are you holding up?" He stepped closer, resting his hands on the railing. "I've been better," he admitted, voice low. "But I made some plans for us tonight, if you're willing." Her brows lifted in quiet curiosity. "Plans?" He gestured toward the far end of the deck, where staff were setting a small table adorned with flickering lanterns. She followed his gaze, eyes widening at the sight. Even from a distance it looked inviting. White linen fluttering in the breeze, 2 chairs angled toward one another, a vase of vibrant flowers at the center. "It's beautiful," she said, turning back to him. "What's the occasion?" "No occasion," he replied, clearing his throat. "I just wanted us to have a private moment to talk, and to apologize for everything you've gone through." He paused, then met her eyes. "And maybe share some things I should have shared sooner." A flicker of worry or perhaps anticipation crossed her face, but she gave a small nod, her voice gentle. "All right. Let me just check on Oliver and make sure he's with the babysitter for the evening. I'll meet you there." When she left, he let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. A thin ribbon of anxiety twisted in his stomach. Telling someone about his infertility wasn't something he did casually, especially not with a woman he found himself growing attached to. Yet that growing attachment was exactly why he had to do this. He refused to let her be blindsided by rumors crafted by cruel strangers. An hour later, dusk had settled fully, and the lanterns glowed against a deepening blue sky. Quiet music drifted from hidden speakers, just soft enough to set a peaceful tone. Valerie arrived in a simple black dress, her hair brushing her shoulders in gentle waves. He stood to greet her, swallowing the sudden tightness in his throat. Candlelight played over her features, revealing hints of both hope and lingering apprehension. They settled into their seats, and a discreet waiter poured them glasses of chilled wine before disappearing to give them privacy. For a few moments, they sampled the first course, light, fresh salads, while the ship's engines hummed softly beneath them. The hush felt fragile, like something they both wanted to preserve yet needed to break. Finally, Valerie spoke, carefully placing her fork down. "Alexander, I can see how tense you are. You said you had something you wanted to tell me. Is this about the threats or the paparazzo?" He stared at the faint glow of the lantern on the table, wondering how to begin. "Part of it involves those threats, yes, but mostly, it's about me." He glanced up, meeting her gaze. "There's a reason the paparazzi keeps harping on me not having an heir. It's not just about being a bachelor or anything trivial. It's deeper." Her expression was open, concerned but not pitying. "You can tell me." He nodded, steeling himself. "I've tried to keep it out of the public eye, but I've known for years that I can't have children." The words came out quietly, more matter-of-fact than he intended, yet each syllable weighed heavily. "I'm infertile, and as you can imagine, people in my position, wealthy, public, are expected to continue some kind of legacy. The media loves to speculate about my missing heir. Some of my competitors use it to spread rumors of instability, claiming I have no successor." He paused, letting the confession hang in the air. The gentle flicker of the candlelight illuminated Valerie's face, which held no trace of mockery or disgust, only empathy. She reached across the table, laying her hand over his. "I'm so sorry you've been carrying that alone," she said softly. "I can only imagine how painful it must be, especially with everyone scrutinizing your private life." A tremor of relief passed through him, relief that she didn't recoil or shift uncomfortably. That was always his greatest fear, pity or judgment. Yet here she was, her hand warm over his knuckles, her gaze unwavering. "It hurt a lot," he admitted. "My father believed in passing everything down the family line. When I learned I couldn't, well, it felt like I'd failed at the one thing he expected." He managed a shaky breath. "I ended up pouring all my energy into business, maybe to prove I wasn't worthless. But every once in a while I'd wonder if someone would accept me anyway. If I could still have a real family, even if it wasn't by blood." Valerie squeezed his hand, eyes shimmering. "Alexander, family is more than genetics, and you have so much to give to people who care about you and who you care about." She hesitated, glancing toward the dark sea, then back at him. "Your being infertile doesn't make you less of a man. Not to me. Not to Oliver." Emotion clogged his throat. He wasn't sure if it was gratitude, relief, or some combination. Hearing her say that made him feel seen in a way he hadn't expected. A breeze ruffled the tablecloth, causing the lantern light to waver. He realized he was still clutching her hand, fingers woven together in a silent pact. "I just needed you to know before the tabloids tried to spin it," he murmured, voice thick. "I was afraid you'd believe their lies or pity me." Valerie shook her head firmly. "I won't fall for their twisted stories, and I don't pity you. I admire you for fighting so hard to keep this private when people can be so cruel." A gentle smile curved her lips. "If anything, I respect you more." He wanted to say so much. Thank her, hold her, maybe even confess that she was part of the reason he'd found the courage to stop hiding. But the moment was both delicate and overwhelming. Carefully, he let go of her hand and reached for his wine glass, hoping a sip might steady him. They lingered over dinner, conversation flowing more freely, though the topic never strayed far from the challenges pressing in around them. Valerie mentioned rumors circulating the ship about a mysterious investor who might be stoking the flames. Alexander admitted he'd suspected as much. By the time dessert arrived, tiny plates of rich chocolate mousse, they felt bound by a fragile kind of closeness. When they rose from the table, the night air felt cooler, carrying the faint smell of salt. The soft music had ended, leaving them with the ambient hush of the ocean. Valerie slipped her arm through his as they walked, her nearness stirring new confidence in him. He walked her back toward her cabin through quiet corridors lit by low amber lights. Every so often they caught a glimpse of other late-night wanderers, some of whom craned their necks in curiosity, but no one approached. There was a sense that, for tonight at least, they could carve out a corner of privacy in this drifting world at sea. They paused at her door, the hush stretching between them again. Valerie turned, searching his eyes. "Thank you for trusting me enough to share that," she said gently. "I know it wasn't easy." He gave a faint smile. "Thank you for listening, and for understanding." His heart pounded. He wasn't sure what else to say, what came next in this strange dance of half-formed hopes. He almost reached for her hand again, but the moment was broken by a flicker of movement down the hallway. A swirl of anxiety coiled in his gut. He glanced over and saw no one, just an empty passage. Still, the memory of threatening notes made him uneasy. He turned back to Valerie, forcing a reassuring expression. "You should get some rest. I'll see you tomorrow?" She nodded, though concern lingered in her gaze. "Yes. Good night, Alexander." He stepped away and headed for his own cabin, the quiet ring of her voice still in his ears. As he neared his door, he caught sight of something white on the floor. His stomach lurched. Another envelope. Kneeling, he picked it up and tore it open, the hallway lights casting a sterile glow on the bold text inside. "Want the world to know why you're hiding on this ship?" Morning came with a certain heaviness in the air, as if the ship itself sensed the tension building within its corridors. Alexander woke to his phone buzzing incessantly, a shrill reminder that normal life, if it could be called that, still lurked beyond these decks. Without fully opening his eyes, he fumbled for the device on his nightstand. Greg's voice burst through the speaker, tense and urgent. "We've got a big problem," he said, skipping any greeting. "There's a rumor hitting the internet that you're planning to adopt a child as a ploy to stabilize your public image. Something about the CEO who can't have kids but wants an heir at any cost. It's spreading like wildfire." Alexander shoved himself upright, heart hammering. The sheets tangled around his legs as he stared at the porthole window, the horizon a blank expanse of water. "Adopt a child?" he echoed. It seemed like such a cruel distortion of his deepest secret, something he'd only just confided in Valerie. "Yeah, and it's not just random speculation," Greg continued grimly. "They're specifically saying there's a single mother on the cruise with you and that you're, quote, taking advantage of her situation to secure an heir. People are calling it everything from exploitation to a publicity stunt." Alexander gritted his teeth. "This is insane. They've weaponized my infertility already." Greg sighed over the line. "I know. All it took was one rumor, then some tabloid websites latched on. Now they're spinning it into a full-blown scandal." Alexander's grip tightened on the phone. "You think that rival investor is behind this?" "I'd wager my paycheck on it," Greg said. "He's been dropping hints for days, and the paparazzo must have fed him material. You've got to get ahead of this. People are already making assumptions." The call ended with no real solution, only a heavy sense of dread gnawing at Alexander's stomach. He stood, forced himself to shower, and dressed in a crisp shirt and slacks. Whenever he looked in the mirror, he saw the weight of the rumor etched on his face, a swirl of anger, hurt, and a fierce need to protect Valerie pressed against his chest. He stepped out into the hallway, scanning for any sign of more ominous notes or lurking cameras. His mind churned with the knowledge that, while he and Valerie had barely begun to trust each other with the truth, strangers were busy spinning that truth into a heartless scandal. His phone kept buzzing, emails from worried colleagues, missed calls from the PR team, cryptic texts from unknown numbers. Each ping felt like a dagger. Down 2 decks, Valerie was in her cabin, reading the same set of vicious headlines on her phone. Her mouth was dry as she skimmed the absurd accusations. CEO Alexander Sterling engaged in secret adoption scheme, wants instant family to boost reputation. The articles hinted that Valerie might be complicit in a get-rich-quick scenario, or that she was being manipulated to hand over her child. It was beyond offensive. It was horrifying. She glanced at Oliver, who sprawled on the bed with a coloring book. He was happily scribbling, oblivious to the storm swirling around them. The thought of his name appearing anywhere near these vicious rumors made her stomach churn. She locked her phone, feeling an urgent need to talk to Alexander, both to find out how this rumor started and to figure out a way to stop it. Not 10 minutes later, Alexander appeared at her door, eyes rimmed with fatigue. She opened it cautiously, uncertain if some gossip-hungry passenger might be lurking nearby with a camera. He slipped inside, pulling the door shut behind him. "Valerie," he said, breath uneven. "I'm so sorry. I just found out about that adoption nonsense." Her frustration and fear boiled to the surface. "They're saying I'm letting you take Oliver to fill some void in your empire," she whispered, glancing at her son to make sure he couldn't hear. "It's despicable." Alexander raked a hand through his hair. "I never wanted this for you. I'm furious at whoever started it." "How do we even stop it now?" she asked, voice trembling. "They're turning our lives into a spectacle. They're making it sound like I'm for sale, like Oliver is for sale." He stepped closer, resisting the urge to pull her into a reassuring hug, not wanting to make her uncomfortable. "We can fight back. Issue a public statement. Something to set the record straight. She swallowed hard. But doing that would draw even more attention. And what if the paparazzi or that investor twists your words again? Alexander's gaze flicked to Oliver, who was still lost in his drawing. The quiet innocence of the boy drove home how cruel these rumors were. "Valerie, I'm ready to go on the record if it protects you and Oliver. Let the media see me telling the truth, that I'd never exploit anyone, least of all the woman and child I—" He broke off, not finishing the sentence that hinted at deeper feelings. Valerie's eyes flickered with empathy. "I don't know if that'll solve everything, but I appreciate how hard you're trying to shield us. I'm scared they'll keep hounding Oliver, keep painting me as some gold digger." He reached for her hand. "I won't let them. We'll find a way out of this." Before they could say anything else, Oliver looked up and waved, sensing the tension in the room. Valerie managed a brittle smile for her son, heart aching. She realized in that moment how grateful she was that Alexander seemed determined not to run from his problems anymore. Whether that would be enough remained uncertain. They parted ways shortly after, each burdened by the rumor's ever-growing presence among the passengers. Outside Valerie's cabin, Alexander's phone rang yet again. The call was from one of his close friends on the ship, a quiet, steadfast partner in his business ventures who had accompanied him on the cruise to keep an eye on him. The friend reported hearing the rumor repeated in corners of the ship's lounges, with some passengers spinning it into wild stories about forced adoptions and hidden contracts. Fury and helplessness blazed within Alexander. Wasn't there any limit to what people would believe? He glanced toward a window, the endless ocean mocking the idea of escape. He might have been sailing in luxury, but there was no respite from the tide of gossip. By the time the afternoon sun glared off the water, the entire ship seemed abuzz. Alexander couldn't walk down a corridor without feeling eyes upon him. Some whispered, others openly gawked. A few seemed sympathetic, but no one spoke openly to him, too afraid or too enthralled by the scandal. Meanwhile, Valerie noticed a shift, too. She overheard murmurs when she picked up Oliver from the children's area. Some parents gave her pitying stares, others wore thinly veiled disdain. She found the stares almost unbearable, but her protective instinct for Oliver fueled her determination to remain composed. In the late afternoon, the captain's voice crackled over the PA system, announcing a formal dinner event. It was intended to be a highlight of the cruise, a refined evening of music, fine dining, and mingling. Yet all Valerie and Alexander could think about was how it might offer fresh opportunities for the paparazzo and that rival investor to stir up more trouble. With hearts pounding, they decided they had little choice but to appear at the dinner, hoping to face rumors head-on rather than cower from them. Valerie donned a modest but elegant dress, while Alexander wore a dark suit that emphasized his stern resolve. Stepping into the grand dining hall, they braced themselves for prying eyes and whispered jabs. Sure enough, as soon as they arrived, the murmur of voices escalated. People turned to stare. Some cameras flashed discreetly near the buffet. A wave of anxiety rushed through Valerie. Oliver wasn't with them, thankfully. She'd arranged for him to stay with a trusted babysitter in their cabin. She couldn't bear him witnessing more public drama. They took their seats at a table near the side, flanked by a few neutral acquaintances who greeted them politely but kept their distance. The dim lighting shimmered on polished glassware and silver cutlery. A string quartet played in the corner, their music a gentle facade over the sea of speculation. Alexander tried to sip from a water glass, but his throat felt constricted. He spotted the same paparazzo skulking at the far end of the room, camera in hand. Before he could decide whether to approach the man or ignore him, another presence swept in. The very rival investor they suspected was fueling these rumors. Dressed in an expensive suit, the investor sidled up to Alexander's table as though they were old friends. His smile looked more like a smirk, a silent message that he held the upper hand. "Evening, Sterling," he said smoothly. "You seem on edge. Something on your mind?" Alexander forced a cold glare. "Get lost." The man shrugged theatrically, casting a mocking glance at Valerie. You must be the lovely mother everyone's talking about. I can see why he wants you around, though I suppose you knew that already. Valerie's stomach tightened. I don't know you, and I don't care to. The investor tisked. Temper. I only came to offer my congratulations on this arrangement. A new family in the making, right? He gave a fake, knowing wink. Children can be so helpful when one needs good publicity. The tension shattered what little composure remained. Alexander stood abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair. A hush spread across nearby tables. The quartet faltered in their melody. Keep her name out of your mouth, Alexander warned, voice quivering with restrained anger. The investor lifted his hands in a feigned display of innocence. Hey, don't shoot the messenger. The tabloids already got hold of this story. I'm just repeating it. Valerie felt humiliation burn hot in her cheeks. People were watching, cameras ready. She could almost hear the headlines forming. CEO loses his cool. Rumors confirmed. Before Alexander could react further, she placed a calming hand on his arm, her voice low with urgency. They want a scene. Don't give it to them here. His chest heaved, fists clenched. Slowly, he forced himself to back down. The rival investor gave a smug half-bow and backed away, returning to a table of men who eyed the drama with smug satisfaction. The hush lingered in the air, thick as fog. Alexander sank back into his chair, face pale with fury. Valerie squeezed his shoulder, fighting the urge to bolt from the room. They both knew this was likely just the beginning of the night's assault. The rumor was out, swirling in real time, and it was uglier than they could have ever imagined. Security escorts the troublemakers away amid boos from onlookers. Oliver looks up at his mother, eyes uncertain, and she gently holds him close, feeling that everything is slipping out of control. But before she can speak, Alexander's phone buzzes with an alert. A breaking news article claims he's plotting to adopt Valerie's child to fill the air void, and the world is already believing it. A subdued hush settled over the ship after the disastrous dinner, as though the entire vessel was holding its breath. Morning light filtered through gray clouds, and even the sea looked duller, as if reflecting everyone's collective unease. Alexander stood on his balcony, gripping the railing so tightly his knuckles turned white. In the past few days, every rumor he feared had turned into a hurricane of scandal, and now the world believed he was trying to adopt an heir. He felt cornered, his every instinct urging him to fight back rather than allow tabloid lies to flourish. With the cruise nearing its final ports, his remaining time on board felt like a ticking clock. If he disembarked without confronting the rumors, they would explode on shore in an uncontrollable frenzy. And if he did nothing, Valerie and Oliver would be left with a swirl of vile headlines following them home. The door behind him opened softly. Valerie stepped into the suite, expression both worried and determined. She was dressed in simple jeans and a light sweater, her face pale from stress, but her eyes unwavering. Oliver was with her, clutching a small stuffed dolphin, one of the souvenirs he'd picked up from the gift shop. The boy's usual sparkle had dimmed. He watched Alexander with cautious curiosity, as if sensing the tension in the air. Valerie cleared her throat. Captain's staff reached out. They heard about what happened in the dining hall. They, asked if you needed a chance to make a statement. It's apparently common practice if a guest is under heavy media scrutiny. Alexander turned away from the view, heart hammering. They want me to speak to the passengers? She nodded. The rumors running wild. People are filming their own theories, posting them online whenever the ship's internet is strong enough. The captain thinks a direct address might calm things down. Oliver looked from Valerie to Alexander. What's a statement? He asked, voice small. Valerie touched his shoulder gently. It's like telling everyone the truth so they stop believing rumors, she explained softly. The boy frowned. Do we have to go to a big stage? The anxiety in his eyes tugged at Alexander's heart. I'll handle it, Alexander assured him, then glanced at Valerie. "I won't let them drag you two through the mud anymore. If the captain's giving me a chance to speak, I'll take it." A tiny, reluctant smile curved Valerie's lips, though worry lingered. She knew how quickly honesty could be twisted once out in the open. Yet Alexander's resolve radiated something new, a refusal to hide. She reached for Oliver's hand. "We'll be there, right in the back, supporting you." Alexander's phone buzzed with another frantic message from Greg. He skimmed it, jaw clenching as he read the updates. The rival investor, emboldened by the swirling scandal, was leaking more statements about Sterling Industries possibly collapsing. Stockholders were getting skittish. Alexander felt the weight of that, but he forced himself to stay focused on the immediate task, clearing Valerie's name and giving Oliver back his peace. Not long after, the ship's main hall was readied for an announcement. The captain, a dignified figure in a crisp uniform, stood near a small stage by the front windows that offered a sweeping view of the horizon. Curiosity filled the hall. Passengers gathered, some openly holding phones in record mode, others whispering behind raised hands. Valerie and Oliver took seats at the far side, trying to remain inconspicuous. She kept one hand firmly on Oliver's back, as if shielding him from the onslaught of stares. Alexander arrived in a simple dark blazer, nothing flashy, not wanting to appear larger than life. The hush grew as he approached the small podium, the microphone set to broadcast across the hall. His heart pounded hard enough that he could feel it in his temples. For a moment he recalled stage fright from his youth, but he forced the memory aside. This was no time to shrink back. "Thank you," he began, voice steady despite the tremor within. "I appreciate the captain allowing me this time. Some of you might have heard rumors, hurtful, untrue rumors, about me, about a woman named Valerie Monroe and her son, Oliver. These rumors claim I intend to buy a family or force an adoption. It's wrong on every level." A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. He could almost see people weighing his words against the sensational stories they'd devoured online. Alexander swallowed, gripping the podium's edges. "The truth is complicated, but here it is. I never had the chance to have children of my own. Medical reasons." He paused, drawing a breath as a hush settled more deeply. "It's something I never chose to share publicly. Unfortunately, certain people decided to profit off my private life, spinning a false narrative. Valerie is someone I care about. She and her son deserve respect, not these cruel accusations." A twinge of gratitude flickered in Valerie's chest as she heard his impassioned words. She glanced at Oliver, who was fiddling with his dolphin plush, but listening intently. Alexander continued, voice stronger. "I'm not hiding from business obligations, nor am I on this cruise to coerce anyone into handing over a child. I came here because of health reasons, stress my doctor insisted I address. I wanted to protect my personal situation from tabloids, and I failed because the rumors found us anyway." He lifted his gaze, letting it sweep across the crowd. "To those of you who saw the hateful speculation and chose to spread it, understand that real people are hurt by such lies. A single mother, an innocent child. I ask you to pause before you share clickbait headlines. And to any so-called rivals or unscrupulous paparazzi in the audience, I'm telling you now, you won't control my narrative anymore. This is my truth." A small pulse of applause started, uncertain at first, but grew as more passengers realized the raw sincerity in Alexander's words. Some lowered their phones, as if suddenly uncomfortable recording a man's most vulnerable confession. The captain nodded approvingly, glancing around to ensure order. Tears pricked at Valerie's eyes. She reached for Oliver's hand, her heart pounding with a mix of relief and admiration for Alexander's courage. His words weren't rehearsed, nor were they a PR stunt. They felt genuine, stripped bare of the usual corporate polish. Just as Alexander seemed ready to step away from the podium, a voice rang out from the crowd, cutting through the applause. "We're not finished here." The tone dripped with hostility. Heads turned to see the rival investor stride forward, flanked by two associates. A camera-wielding paparazzo lurked behind him, lens glinting under the ceiling lights. The investor's sneer was unmistakable. "Brave speech, Sterling, but speeches don't change facts, or stock prices for that matter. Maybe you want to explain why your company's shares are dropping off a cliff." Alexander's composure tensed. He'd expected a challenge, but not so soon, not so boldly. "I'll handle business issues on land," he said calmly. "This moment is about defending an innocent child and his mother from lies." The investor flicked his gaze to Valerie, who stood protectively with Oliver by her side. "Is that right?" he said mockingly. "Or is it about saving face so your empire doesn't crumble under the weight of personal weakness?" Anger sparked in the audience. A few passengers shouted protests, defending Alexander. Others simply looked confused. Some phone cameras turned on again, capturing every tense second. Valerie felt a surge of heat in her cheeks. She was tempted to march forward and tell the investor exactly what she thought of him. Oliver shrank against her, unsettled by the man's aggressive tone. Alexander spoke again, voice deepening with resolve. "My company's future is strong. Whatever fluctuations occur in the market will pass once these falsehoods are put to rest. But my main priority right now is ensuring no more harm comes to people I care about." A cluster of security personnel stepped toward the investor, silently warning him not to escalate further. The man smirked, seemingly enjoying the chaos he'd sown. His associates whispered to him, urging a quieter approach. But the paparazzo behind them leaned in, snapping photos of Alexander, of Valerie holding Oliver, of the tension that crackled through the air. The captain tried to regain control, tapping the microphone. "Please, everyone, respect the privacy of our guests. Mr. Sterling was given this opportunity to address rumors, and you've heard him. Let's maintain decorum on this ship." The investor eased back, chuckling under his breath. "Fine. We'll see how this all plays out when real headlines hit the shore." With one last glare, he turned and strode away, his little entourage trailing behind. The paparazzo snapped a few final pictures before security escorted him aside. Alexander stared after them, fury and relief clashing inside him. A hush still clung to the hall, an uneasy calm after the confrontation. At the far side, Valerie locked eyes with Alexander. Her lips curved in a trembling smile, tears shining at the corners of her eyes. He offered a small nod, an unspoken promise that he wasn't giving up. Some passengers began to applaud again, this time more resolutely. Others drifted away, uncertain what to make of the whole spectacle. Still, the sense of unity among those who believed Alexander's heartfelt confession offered a glimmer of hope. Perhaps the ship could move beyond these ugly rumors, letting everyone enjoy the final days at sea. As people dispersed, Alexander stepped off the podium. He made his way to Valerie and Oliver, ignoring the stares. Valerie slipped her hand into his, the gesture warm and grounding. Oliver clung to them both, relief reflected in his wide eyes. In that moment, Alexander felt a surge of gratitude, one that overpowered the anger and fear he'd been harboring. "Thank you," Valerie whispered. "I know that wasn't easy." He stroked Oliver's hair, then brushed a feather-light touch along Valerie's cheek. "You're worth it." A hush fell over the hall. Valerie's heart pounded at the sincerity in his voice. Oliver, sensing the grown-up's emotions, peered up curiously. For the first time in days, Valerie felt hope coiling in her chest instead of dread. Maybe, just maybe, honesty could win out, even against a storm of lies. Yet as the last onlookers drifted away, a sudden voice rose from the far corner. "Wait, everyone!" a woman exclaimed. Heads whipped around. In her outstretched hand dangled a flash drive. "I have something that might change everything we just heard." A hush falls over the hall. Valerie, tears on her cheeks, takes a step toward Alexander. But before she can speak, a voice in the crowd shouts a shocking announcement. someone claiming to have evidence that might change everything. A tense hush fell as all eyes turned to the woman holding the flash drive. She stood at the edge of the hall, breathing heavily, her face pale but resolute. A few passengers murmured, shuffling closer in curiosity. Alexander glanced at Valerie, whose expression flickered between alarm and confusion. Oliver clung to his mother's side, sensing the adult's tension. With slow steps, the woman approached, her heels clicking on the polished floor. The captain, still stationed near the stage, held up a hand to calm the gathering. "What evidence do you have?" he asked, his stern voice echoing slightly. "You're aware that false accusations will only add to the turmoil." She swallowed hard. "I know. I'm not trying to hurt anyone. I want to show what I discovered. It may prove who's really behind these rumors." She glanced nervously at a cluster of people, including the rival investor lurking at the back. Her gaze skimmed the paparazzo, who stiffened under her scrutiny. Alexander stepped forward, heart pounding. "Let me see it," he said calmly, though a swirl of dread and hope churned in his stomach. A screen was hastily prepared near the stage. The woman inserted the flash drive into a port, and a video file blinked to life on the monitor. The shaky footage showed a small, dimly lit cabin room, definitely somewhere aboard the ship. Voices were muffled at first, but then sharpened as two men came into view, the paparazzo and the rival investor. They stood close to each other, whispering about taking Sterling down with whatever it takes. Bits of conversation spilled out, talk of forging documents, planting notes under doors, and twisting Alexander's infertility into sensational headlines. Gasps rippled through the watching crowd. The investor tried to lunge forward, shouting, "This is a setup!" but security immediately blocked his path. The video continued, capturing the men mentioning Valerie and Oliver by name, crowing about how easy it was to spin the story into a desperate adoption fiasco. Finally, the file ended with a shot of the paparazzo collecting a thick envelope, presumably payment for his silence and cooperation in generating the scandal. When the screen went dark, the hall erupted in angry murmurs. Shocked faces turned on the investor, some passengers hurling insults at him. The paparazzo shrank back, attempting to duck behind the cluster of onlookers, but the security staff moved swiftly. The captain cleared his throat, voice shaking with outrage. "That is all I need to see. Sir, you and your accomplices will be confined to your cabins pending an investigation." An immediate wave of relief washed over Valerie. She exhaled shakily, hugging Oliver close. The child looked up at her, wide-eyed but calmer now that the truth was out in the open. Alexander stood momentarily stunned, hardly daring to believe that the scheme had been exposed so decisively. Passengers began booing the investor as security escorted him and the paparazzo out. Some folks started to applaud Alexander in a show of support. Others confronted the disgraced men, demanding they apologize for the fear and distress they caused. The woman who brought the flash drive shut down the video. She glanced at Alexander with uncertain eyes, as if fearing he might blame her for not coming forward sooner. Alexander crossed the hall, extending a hand in gratitude. "Thank you," he said quietly, voice trembling with emotion. "You have no idea what this means for me and for Valerie and her son." She lowered her gaze, relief coursing through her. "I overheard them bragging. I managed to capture it with my phone and transfer the file. I wasn't sure if anyone would believe me, but I couldn't let them keep lying." Valerie joined them, Oliver tucked against her side. "Thank you," she echoed, her eyes shining with both gratitude and the remnants of tears. "Those rumors were poisoning our lives." The woman gave a rueful nod and slipped away, clearly overwhelmed by the spotlight she had drawn upon herself. The captain, maintaining order, announced that the disturbance was resolved, and he urged everyone to respect the privacy of those involved. Slowly, the crowd dispersed, returning to lounges and decks with a hot new topic for discussion. But this time, the truth was on Alexander and Valerie's side. Alexander knelt, meeting Oliver's gaze. "You doing okay, buddy?" he asked gently. Oliver nodded solemnly. "Can we go somewhere quiet?" he whispered, rubbing his eyes. The excitement had exhausted him. Valerie smoothed his hair, turning to Alexander. "We should take him back to the cabin. He needs rest." "I'll come with you," Alexander offered. "I want to make sure you're both settled. Then I have a few more things to handle." So they left the main hall behind, moving down corridors that already felt lighter without the weight of looming scandal. Fellow passengers who had witnessed the confrontation gave them encouraging smiles or soft congratulations. One couple even patted Alexander on the shoulder, murmuring that they never believed those nasty rumors in the first place. Safely back in Valerie's cabin, Oliver curled into bed, the stuffed dolphin clutched in his arms. Valerie kissed his forehead, whispering comforting words until his eyes drooped shut. Alexander stood by, arms folded, watching the gentle scene. A pang of longing coursed through him, an ache he had carried for so long, along with the knowledge of what he could never have. But in this moment, love felt closer than ever before, not dependent on blood or genetics, but on the raw bond of caring for someone's happiness more than your own. Once Oliver was soundly asleep, Valerie turned and quietly shut the small bedroom door. She leaned against it, regarding Alexander with tired yet radiant eyes. "I can't believe this is finally over. I mean, I'm sure the rumors won't vanish overnight, but at least the truth came out." He exhaled, allowing himself a wry smile. "I still have to sort out damage control on land, but yes, this is a huge relief." She approached him slowly, the cabin's warm lamplight smoothing the tension in her features. "Thank you for standing up for me and Oliver. I know you risked your reputation, your business to do it." "That business doesn't mean much if I can't protect the people I care about," he said simply. He hesitated, then gently took her hand. "Valerie, I've spent most of my adult life assuming no one would ever truly accept me if they knew my secret. After meeting you, though, I realized I was wrong. I was trying to protect myself from heartbreak, but I ended up shutting out the possibility of real happiness." Her lips parted, eyes shining. "You don't have to protect yourself from me. I'm here." Emotion choked him momentarily, but he forged ahead. "You and Oliver, you've reminded me that love is bigger than fear or old scars." He cleared his throat, gazing at her earnestly. "I'd like to be part of your lives if you'll have me. I know it's fast and complicated, but—" Her hand tightened around his. "Alexander," she whispered, blinking away tears. "You already are part of our lives. Oliver sees something good in you, and so do I." She paused, a soft laugh escaping. "So yes, I'd like that." They embraced quietly, hearts pounding. The unspoken promise between them felt more powerful than any vow shouted from a stage. Outside the porthole, the sky had begun to fade into twilight, the ship pressing onward to its next destination. Time slipped by. Eventually, Alexander kissed Valerie's temple and excused himself, needing to check with the captain and ensure the troublemakers were contained. He also wanted to call Greg and confirm that the fiasco wouldn't destroy his company's stock. As he turned to leave, Oliver stirred in bed, half awake. Valerie rushed over to soothe him, but Oliver mumbled something that made Alexander's heart lurch. "Mom, is Alexander still here? He's my friend." His little voice slurred with sleep, but the sweetness of it warmed the entire cabin. Alexander smiled, stepping close enough for Oliver to see him in the dim light. "I'm right here, buddy," he said softly. Oliver nodded in satisfaction. "Good," he murmured before drifting off again, a small smile on his lips. The next morning, the ship approached its final port. Passengers packed their things, the atmosphere buzzing with thoughts of returning home. Yet for Alexander and Valerie, departure felt less like an ending and more like a long-awaited beginning. Standing at the railing with Oliver in her arms, Valerie pointed out the harbor's distant buildings. Alexander stood beside them, the breeze ruffling his hair. A sense of calm and hope filled the space between them. He touched Valerie's shoulder, meeting her gaze. "I don't know what the future holds once we're on land, but I promise I won't run from it. From us." She smiled, pressing a hand to his chest. "We'll figure it out, together." Just then, Oliver looked up and reached for Alexander's hand, his small fingers curling around Alexander's palm. The boy gave a shy grin, eyes shining with trust. Alexander felt a rush of emotion so strong that his eyes stung. He bent to meet Oliver's gaze. "I may not have been born to be a dad," he said quietly, voice trembling with gratitude. "But you and your mom taught me that love can transform us into what we've always dreamed we could be." Oliver giggled, not fully grasping the gravity of those words, but Valerie's gaze shimmered with tears. They stayed that way for a moment, a small circle of warmth amid the bustle of a disembarking ship. Then the gangway was lowered, the engines hummed, and it was time to step onto the dock and face whatever lay ahead. Yet as Alexander held Valerie's hand and Oliver's other hand clung to hers, he felt more certain than ever that no matter how fierce the storms of rumor and scandal might grow, they would weather it all together. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.